Good evening, everyone. This is the Asian American Bar Association of New York's community convening regarding the Zhiwen Yan case. I see there are people still coming into the room, so we'll give it another minute or so before we start, but welcome all, and we thank you for taking the time on a Friday evening to have this important discussion. So welcome. We'll start soon. All right, I think we can start. My name is Yang Chen. I'm the executive director of the Asian American Bar Association of New York. We call ourselves AABANY for short. And this is a community convening to discuss the murder of Zhiwen Yan. I'll do a quick round of introductions. The moderator for this call is Kwok. He is a member of our board. He chairs our issues committee. He also is one of the executive editors of our latest anti-Asian violence report called Endless Tide. And then also we have here Elaine Chu. She is a professor of law at St. John's University School of Law. One of the classes she teaches there is criminal law, and she's a former Manhattan assistant DA. She also is a co-executive editor of the Endless Tide report. With us here is Megan Gao. She is an associate at the law firm of Paul Weiss. She is an associate editor of the Endless Tide report. I see that Sylvia Chin is here as well. Sylvia is a co-executive editor of the Endless Tide report. She is a member of our task force. She is president of the Asian American Law Fund of New York, which is AABANY's nonprofit affiliate. And she is partner of counsel at the law firm of White & Case. I'm happy to have with us Jim Lin, who is a former board member of the Asian American Bar Association. He is a retired veteran ADA, assistant DA, most recently from the Kings County DA's office, but before that, from Manhattan DA's office. And I'm also happy to have here on the, hosting the Zoom call, Francis Chen. He is the technology director for AABANY. We also have here Jingyi Wang. She is going to serve as an interpreter. The plan actually, in the interest of time, is not for her to be a simultaneous translator or interpreter for everything we're saying. It'll be more for when we have people coming on to speak or to ask questions. If people would prefer to ask the question in Mandarin, they can do so. I think she will act as an interpreter when that happens. Okay, I think we have introduced everybody who is on the panel. So let me kick it off by talking a little bit about AABANY and specifically the task force. For those of you in the room who may not be attorneys and may not have ever heard of a bar association, we were founded in 1989 to represent the interests of AAPI lawyers, judges, prosecutors, professors, anybody and everyone involved in the legal profession in New York City and New York State. We currently have over 1,500 members. That's 1,500. And that makes us the largest diverse bar association in the country. One of our missions is to advocate for the AAPI community. And the way we've been doing that in the last couple of years is the work we've been doing on anti-Asian violence. We actually wrote our first anti-Asian violence report. We published it last February 2021. And that report was called The Rising Tide. And it was co-authored with the law firm of Paul Weiss. And shortly after we published the report, we formed within AABANY an anti-Asian violence task force. And through this task force, we wanted to try to implement the many proposals we put in the first report on how to combat anti-Asian violence, how to address the problem. And so we brought together the leadership of many different committees within AABANY, including the academic committee, of which Elaine Chu is a co-chair, including the prosecutors committee, including the issues committee, many, many committees. And over the past year, we've attacked the problem in three ways. First, through education and communication. Next, through advocacy. And third, through research. Advocacy involved getting in front of law enforcement, elected officials, policymakers, both at local, state, and federal levels to talk in general terms about the changes that needed to be made in policy and legislation, but also in more direct terms, advocating for specific victims and survivors of hate crimes. On the research front, Elaine Chu assembled a team within the task force to gather and collect and analyze data. And a lot of that research has been summarized and distilled and shared in the Endless Tide report, which we released on May 31st. And that research, those numbers have gained quite a bit of press attention in the last week and a half or so. So the Endless Tide report reported that for the first 9 months, the first 3 quarters of 2021, we counted 233 cases of violence against Asians in New York. And we mean New York City, the 5 boroughs. Out of those 233 cases that were reported, 91 led to arrests. Out of that number, 41 were prosecuted by the DA's offices as hate crimes. And from those 41, 7 resulted in convictions for hate crimes. 6 of those were in Manhattan. 1 of those was in Queens. And I'll spend a little time talking about that particular case in Queens. And some of you who've been following the news may have known about this case. So that's the Patrick Mateo case. And when it happened in February of 2021, it hit the news quite a bit, in part because well, I'll step back. For those of you who don't remember, the Patrick Mateo case was one where there was a 52-year-old woman in Flushing, Queens, standing in line at a bakery, and she got into an altercation standing in line with Patrick Mateo. And there was a scuffle. Mateo pushed the victim to the ground. She hit her head on a metal container on the way down to the ground, and it scratched her head, and it was such a serious wound that she had to get 10 stitches. And, you know, the daughter of the victim was a friend of the celebrity Olivia Munn, and she tweeted about this incident, and that helped to lead to the arrest of Patrick Mateo. And initially, the DA's office was going to only charge a misdemeanor assault in the case. And through some public outrage and outcry and publicity around this case, including some that Albany itself was involved in, we were ultimately able to get the DA's office to upgrade that to an aggravated harassment in the second degree as a hate crime. And how did we do that? In part, it was through Mateo himself in an interview with the New York Times, disclosing that he had said to the victim when they were arguing online, "This is not China. Give me some space with this coronavirus." And then he shoved it to the ground. And Albany actually, as part of the advocacy efforts of the task force, met with the Queens DA's office, met with the hate crimes chief, and showed them this statement and said, how can that not be evidence of racial intent? How can that not be evidence of a racial animus to support a hate crimes charge? And they really didn't have good answers for us. They were still telling us that they didn't think there was a hate crime here. And we vehemently disagreed, and we suggested strongly that they should subpoena the guy's text records and find out if there's other similar statements to support a hate crimes charge. And they kind of, you know, didn't take us seriously. I don't think they were taking us seriously. But we continued to work with the community. We went back to the DA's office, tried to convince them that they should pursue this case more aggressively. And a couple of months later, we saw a press release from the Queens DA's office. And I think it was actually in May, happened to be Asian Heritage Month. And they disclosed that they had, you know, actually subpoenaed Mateo's text records, found additional evidence of racial intent, and charged him for hate crime. So that was an example of how this sort of perfect storm of circumstances coalesced. You had the celebrity tweeting about it. You had Albany working with the community, advocating vigorously with the prosecutors to make this prosecution happen. And finally, in August, there was a guilty plea from Mateo, and he has agreed as part of a plea to take anger management counseling, and he has to go back to court periodically to update the status. And if he doesn't fulfill the conditions of his plea agreement, then he will have to spend about a year in jail for this assault. So the lesson that we've learned from that is that, you know, the community can come together and to get our prosecutors, our law enforcement, to take it seriously and charge a hate crime when there's evidence of a hate crime. And I hope that in the course of tonight's discussion, we can talk about how we can harness this power in our community, which definitely will require some coordination and organization. And with that as an intro, I'll pass it on to Chris, who's going to be serving as a moderator tonight. So Chris.
Thanks so much. And so with that, we hope we could just sort of lay out who we are, where we're coming from, the work we're doing. And we know there are many friends, you know, all over, you know, in the community. Of course, many of us live in Forest Hills or grew up in Queens, so we are very close to this. And we have some information to share, but I think we'll share that in a dialogue tonight, because I think we really want to hear from the community, and there are many of the community leaders that have already been involved. and have questions, concerns, things, and we want to hear from you first. So I've got a list here. I'm just going to let, just sort of in a random way. The first person on my list is Stella Zhu. So Stella, I'm going to promote you to a panelist, and, please, and when you come in, talk for about 5 minutes to give us a sense of, sort of where you're coming from, and what concerns you have, and we will, try to address them. So.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. My name is Stella Xu. I'm a resident of Forest Hills, and I had prepared a statement, which I will read, but at this point, I just want to first express my gratitude for this meeting even taking place. We at Forest Hills has been waiting for this since April 30th, since Yang was killed. And I don't know how many of you know, but just 2 weeks prior, we had another murder, or Shoya Gal. She was a white, wealthy, blonde woman. She was a friend of mine. So, it was devastating to begin with. But I think in particular, those two murders being 2 weeks apart and watching just the difference in the way that the murders are treated is appalling. I don't have to tell anybody in this meeting about what it means to be poor, immigrant, an Asian person working in New York City. The police in this case have been so appalling in their treatment of the murder, their investigation. Or Shoya Gal's murder got a full press conference. Crime Stoppers posters were everywhere. He was arrested 4 days later, and he remains in jail with no bail. Glenn Hirsch, who was arrested for the murder 33 days later, he was eligible for bail. He is eligible for bail for $500,000. And his harassment of the workers of the Great Wall began in November of 2021. So this had gone on for 5 months. This included using a knife to damage a car parked outside of the restaurant and threatening Mr. Yang and brandishing a gun at the restaurant workers on January 28th. I read the AABANY report on Patrick Mateo and how much work it took to have Mateo be charged with a hate crime. I know that David Kim's case remains not charged about a hate crime. There was also a white driver who killed a Chinese delivery food driver, Xing Longling, that Melinda Katz had refused to make any charges on. And a full disclosure, I know Melinda Katz, our kids went to the same school. She literally lives around the corner from me. She is not a stupid person. She just doesn't care. Jess Zhao, I think, who is scheduled to speak later, can talk about what happened at the last precinct council meeting. But we've been now to 2 community board meetings with the deputy inspector. And what I would like to receive support on tonight specifically is how to counter the narrative that the police did everything they could. Yet at the last CB6 meeting, the deputy inspector literally said, "We went to arrest him. He wasn't home. We waited in the car and then we left." He also said, "Well, if we had arrested him earlier, you knew he had 8 guns. Who's to say it wouldn't have escalated? Who's to say arresting him wouldn't have made things worse?" He's refused to discuss aspects of the case because it was an ongoing investigation. And after Hirsch was arrested, he said, "Well, I'm still not going to discuss it because I don't want to taint the jury pool." These outrageous things are said with an open face. And because I'm not a lawyer, I don't have, a background, the community could really use some help in how to advocate for the Young family and how to counter against this narrative that this couldn't have been prevented. There's nothing anybody can do. He doesn't need to be charged with a hate crime. And the bail was totally fine. Like, I'm just sick of it. And I'm sorry I'm a little emotional tonight, but this is the culmination of, a month in the making. And I really appreciate everybody's on the call's allyship and support. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's really, we wanted to come to hear you and to support you. as a task force. And, you know, I think there were a lot of concerns, and we know that because we've been following the case, we've been reading, and we know the concerns. And we think that there should be a concerted sort of effort to deal with the PD, the police department, and the DA on these questions, which they need to answer. And we want to help lead an effort in questioning them and providing real responses, because I think the feeling in the community is that it was utterly failed by the police department. You know, and quite honestly, there are many different cuts, right? One of the cuts is hate crimes. To answer Amy's question, hate crimes have to be sort of committed in whole or substantial part based on sort of the race, national origin of that victim, okay? In whole or substantial part. And that's a very high standard. And we are recommending that the law said in whole or in part, so they can be part of it. Elaine, I don't know if you wanted to talk about that, or Megan, if you're there, if you wanted to talk about that.
I don't have more to add except to just point out that usually motive why a crime is committed isn't even necessarily a element that has to be proven in a lot of crimes. Some crimes, hate crimes is one of those special crimes that requires an additional motive, an additional amount of proof on motive. And so, but in particular, its wording in the laws require that the race, national origin, beliefs about the victim's race and national origin have to be, as Chris said, in whole or in substantial part the motive. And so prosecutors have told us that that's, you know, a pretty significant burden for them.
That's right. And then, you know, and Victor, you're asking, he was stalking them for months, and this is not a hate crime. So a couple of responses there. A hate crime charge here will not do much to change the actual sort of punishment, because he is facing now some very serious charges. So that's just sort of the fact, sort of law-based, you know, sort of answer about hate crime. However, we agree with you that to us, particularly as Asians, we know this was a hate crime. Like, we feel it. We know that, like, you know, his response to a fight about food, because it was a Chinese restaurant, and the reaction that it engendered, he believed he was able to behave in a certain way because they were Chinese, because they were Asian. We're totally with you. We think that too. But under the law as it is, given sort of what they have, it might not qualify under the present law as a hate crime or be chargeable as such. That's a possibility. Now, all of that being said, we totally agree with you that this was a hate crime. That's our sort of look at it, right? And part of that is this. I want to walk everyone through this sort of math equation, except there's a word equation. And you just put it like in your head, which is Jewish temple equals Islamic mosque equals an Asian place of business, whether it be a spa, whether it be a restaurant, right? That's what we need police and the news and the people to understand, is that people associate Asians, whether they be Koreans, Chinese, small business owners with their business, the Chinese restaurant, the Korean spa, right? Think about the shooting in Dallas. That person went to an Asian town, went for looking Korean spa. Think about the Atlanta murders. They're going to a spa looking for Asian people, right? And we need PD, and we need to understand that those things should engender within police, prosecutors, at least a question. Yes, they're picking this target because they're Asian. So we need to begin to have that understanding ourselves in our head, and I think it needs to be within, you know, our American consciousness about how to analyze these crimes, right? So I'm going to go, unless there's anyone else on the panel, to the next speaker. Hold on, Amy Shen, you're in. Welcome. So, Amy, you want to go? Amy, are you there? Well, we'll let her fix her her thing. And Fulton, why don't you go? Okay. Fulton?
You might be muted, so.
Yeah, I
sure.
just got.
I mean, great.
Okay, hey, Fulton.
Hey, how's it going, Chris? Thank you, Asian American Bar Association New York. Thank you all for gathering this meeting today, and thank you for the recent report. And I met Chris through a lot of this work revolving anti-Asian hate, and I'm calling in today from, I guess we represent They Can't Burn Us All, which is a very grassroots organization where it originates from back in 2020, where that 89-year-old grandmother was set on fire in Brooklyn and Bensonhurst. And at the time, it was, I think, one of the more egregious cases. And, it really begs the question, how do we really define when it becomes a hate crime? And I think during that time, the local precinct was not very responsive, and they didn't really treat this case with the needed respect. And I think over the time, with enough noise, we were able to at least get some action being done for it. And this past couple of years, whether it's with Kwok Ma showing support for Yaopan Ma, and now with Zhiwen Yan, I think, yeah, and oftentimes we just got to work a lot harder where there's immigrants involved, where there's like working class people involved, where there's issues related to language barriers. And gosh, like the precinct was, I feel like they did everything right, everything that the elected officials or like everyone would have encouraged, like the Great Wall did correctly. I just would like the question I've always been hearing is, what do you want to see with this case, with the Zhiwen case? Like, what would you like to see get done? And honestly, like I want to know what went wrong. Like, how did they drop the ball on this one? How did they, like, what did they take down when they reported to the precinct? Like, they're obligated to get a copy of that. I wanted to see if they actually took them seriously, which I imagine they didn't. I want to see why it took 33 days for Melinda Katz to issue an arrest warrant when probably a week after he killed them, the second day he got a lawyer, and they probably got the security footage within a week, so they already knew his license plate, and just want to know why they would let a killer out beyond the street for that long. So we've already tried to get the Great Wall some security camera system. We got them some pepper sprays to protect themselves. I'd imagine something like this would happen more in the future, but they did everything correct. So it really boggles my mind.
Right. Elaine, did you want to respond in any way to Fulton?
I think that we on the task force are also trying to look for answers with respect to not just the delay in the arrest, but as both of the last two speakers talked about, also about how the police responded to the months or the much earlier complaints from the restaurant that had happened months earlier. And so where you don't have answers to that, but what you're asking about is exactly also on our mind. And we are going to work hard in the next couple of weeks and months to, hopefully it won't take that long to find some answers, some concrete answers about what the police response was.
Gotcha. And again, thank you for gathering us all together. I think we really gotta get everyone together to really unite on this one and really apply some pressure. I feel like when it happens to either an outer borough or like especially in Queens, what I've noticed is there's not as much energy there as something that would happen in the city. So yeah, I hope we can, everyone on the call today, we can all work together for make sure his life is not lost in vain.
Yeah. And I think that, you certainly have the attention of the Queens DA right now, because she is on this particular case right now. with a lot of resources. She's assigned senior people internally. That's when we retract the seriousness. They've got, they're answering our questions. We're hearing through our sources, sort of responses to our questions. And part of hearing the community now is for us to take it in and then put out the issues that we want to have answers for and then get them. And it's quite clear, I think it's becoming quite clear because it's very like what happened in November and December after he threatened them with a gun and they reported it and they identified him. Did the police respond? Because I think we all know that if you don't speak English well, if you're an immigrant business owner, the police don't really give a damn about you. And when they get reports about you, they're probably not going to take that seriously. And if it's some like, and our thought is, hey, it's some white guy in Forest Hills who has deep roots. So they're like, oh, he's not dangerous. He's just getting mad and he flashed a gun. But, if it was a black person who did that, maybe they'd be hauled away. If it was a black homeless person, they would haul them right away, right? And part of the reason actually is policing. If there's a homeless person that's a suspect, they're going to arrest that person right away. If there's a person who is homed, who has a home, they won't. Like, why is that? Well, for the police, if they're homeless, they got to scoop them up because they don't know where they're going. If they have a home, okay, we keep surveillance. We're going to know. It's really how the rules are. But, obviously the rules as you see them in terms of how the police conduct can also be reflected in sort of racial differences. There's no question. And I think that, how Asian Americans in Forest Hills are treated by the PD is a real question we need to answer. The responsiveness, do they care? Do they give a shit? Basically, are they afraid of political blowback if they don't give a shit, right? Those are the things that come collectively through political power. It's sad that it has to be, that it can't just be public safety is taken seriously no matter who you are or by whom. But we don't actually live in that system. And so I think that, part of our, our goal is to collect concerns, and then we will collectively as a task force try to help you. And you guys are the community leaders. We recognize that. And thank you so much for coming. And quite honestly, thank you for all the work you're doing. Don't thank us, actually, because we are here because we have to be. We are here because we have some expertise and some background, and we want to put that to use for you. And so, let's thank everyone. We all should, we don't need to thank you. Let's just work together. So I just want to, okay, so I'm going to go into the next one. Let's see, Ed, I'm going to have you come in. So Ed, thanks very much. We know you've been doing a lot of work in your organization. Some great people and have been leading the charge as well. So Ed, please, speak.
Chris, are you referring to me?
Ed Wong, yeah.
Okay. Well, even though you said, we don't need to thank you, but we do need to thank you. We need to thank AABANY and everything you're doing. We need to thank everyone that's on this Zoom that's participating. And, we've been dealing with this for quite some time now. And I think a lot of the patience and the frustration is coming out at some of the meetings. People are just very frustrated. We're not getting answers that we'd like. We're not getting timely answers. We're not basically getting answers. And so I think I've emailed a couple of things to you. But one thing I do want to share with the broader audience is that the 112th precinct, which is based in Forest Hills, that's where all the top brass is in Borough North in Queens. So a lot of people don't know that. They think it's just a precinct, but 112th precinct is there, but above the 112th precinct, that's where all the senior top brass in Queensboro North are. And so, Tom Yang, the hate crimes task force, those folks are all there. So I just wanted to, a lot of people don't know that, but these are the things that I've learned over the last few years by trying to develop this relationship with the PD and trying to keep that open relationship so that we can, at this point in time, if we need their help, they're there for us. But it seems like they do say that they're helping, but at the same time, I feel that they're not doing enough. Specifically to this case, there was a gun that was used at a restaurant, and for some reason, if removing guns is a top concern for the PD at this point in time, and even before, why was it not pursued? And I think that's the question that I have. And they said, oh well, it may not have prevented this because he had other guns. It doesn't matter. you have a gun, go find it and get it off the street. That seems to be the narrative that they're sharing, and now they have this, gun violence. What is it? Gun Violence Awareness Month. Well, it's kind of a little bit too late for that now, in this case, because you're telling everyone to get the guns off the street, but you're telling everyone to do it, but then we are reporting one, but nothing's being done about it. So that's one of the things that's been very, very frustrating, and so I think that's and also some concerns. Again, I think Stella had mentioned, and Jess will probably talk about it later, but we've been at these meetings, and we kind of asked the questions, we've gotten no answers. Now that the case is where it is now, they're still not sharing much because they say they don't want to impact the investigation. So my question is specifically to all the things that we're doing right now, whether it be speaking about it now, being on social media, speaking to the press, kind of raising awareness. Will that impact the case in a negative way? Because I was talking to a couple of the lawyers. There's certain things that will the defense attorneys use some of the stuff that's out there, whether it be online, social media, in the press, us talking about meetings. Will that be used in some kind of way in a defense that could affect the case? Is that something is that a fair question to ask everyone or not? Because that is my concern. We need to speak up, but it seems like if we speak up, is it going to affect the case? We of course don't want to affect the case, and so it's kind of like, is this a double-edged sword? I don't know how it is in a legal world. If so I'm concerned.
Yeah.
Yes. Hi.
Elaine.
Can I speak? This is Jim Lin.
Yes, Jim. Yeah, Jim Lin is a former Manhattan prosecutor, a prosecutor from Manhattan and DA. So Jim, please go.
All right. So yeah. So I was in the Manhattan DA's office for about 27 years. And I was at Brooklyn for almost 4.5. I was a bureau chief. So I kind of know what I'm talking about. But to answer your question, are statements made in public to the press, is there a potential there for them to be used by defense attorneys at a trial? Well, the answer is yes. It depends who the statement is attributed to. But if a witness, whether police or civilian, is captured making a statement about the case on any type of media now, whether it's social media, print, newscast, radio, what have you, then yes, as I often told witnesses, it can come back and bite them in the ass. I hope I've treated all my witnesses with respect and dignity. And I told them to their face, listen, you are adults. You are free to speak to whomever you want. But keep in mind that whatever you say to, let's say, a member of the press, or maybe even now on social media or a post, you have to own it. That's yours. And it could very well come back to haunt you when you take the witness stand. And I always tell witnesses, the less you talk about the case to the press, to defense attorneys, to defense investigators, the less likely you're going to be cross-examined to the hilt when and if your time to testify comes. So I do not hold it against actual witnesses, police or civilians, to be to at least be reticent or reluctant to make statements about an ongoing investigation or about a pending matter. There's also some concern about possibly, I think it's a strong term, but possibly poisoning a potential jury pool if a case goes to trial. Which is why, yes, DA's offices do indeed issue press releases, but the better practice, and I think all the offices in this city do it, at the end of the press release, they'll say these are only charges. Of course, the defendant is presumed innocent until proven guilty, or some language to that extent. All right. And we're trying not to, again, and I know my friends and friends at AABANY have heard me say time and time again, the DA's office is not going to try this case in the media, in the press. They're going to have to do it in court.
So
But could I just ask Jim a question? Jim, that was really helpful to hear. I'm curious more about the specific question I think that I heard Ed asking, which is, as a person who's not a witness, but as a concerned member of the community, whether it's Forest Hills, New York City, Asian America, whatever it is, just as a concerned member of the community, what about our own posts on social media?
So
There's been a lot of that, and I'm wondering if there's a chance of a defense attorney making an argument, right, that poisons a jury pool.
yeah, so actually, Elaine, let me address that. I'm hoping that in the audience, people have heard the name Vincent Chin. And in fact, June 19th, 40 years ago was when he was murdered. And in his case, when he was murdered outside of Detroit, there were no hate crime laws. So when his killers were brought before the judge, they got away with $3,000 bail and never served a day in jail. And that's true to this day. And that actually galvanized the Asian American community to stand up and protest this great injustice. And it's true that Vincent Chin was, his murderers were never convicted of any hate crimes, not convicted of any crimes, but there was an effort to seek civil rights redress for Vincent Chin. And they brought a civil rights case on behalf of Vincent Chin in federal court. And initially it was going to be tried in Detroit. And because the Asian American community was so vocal, and not just in Detroit, but nationally, so vocal in protesting the great outrage of his murder, defense counsel in that case was able to make a successful motion to move the case to Cincinnati, claiming that the incredible swell of publicity about the case prevented their clients, the murderers, from getting a fair trial in Detroit. And the case got moved to Cincinnati. And I don't know how many people have been to Cincinnati, but it's in a part of Ohio that is close to the South. In fact, you can, in a short amount of time, get from Ohio to Kentucky from Cincinnati. So the jury in Cincinnati was mostly white. In fact, I think they were probably all white back in the 80s. And they did not find a civil rights violation. So I think, we have to be mindful of the lesson of the Vincent Chin case. There are a lot of lessons there. So on the one hand, it was great that, our community, which is often seen as being very passive and docile, we're not here to make any noise. We don't want to rock the boat or anything like that. It was great that during Vincent Chin, we stood up and protested a great injustice. But it seems like we almost did our job too well and got the case moved from Detroit, where it was more of an urban setting. You might have found jurors there who would have been perhaps more sympathetic to Vincent Chin than to his killers. So I think we have to be careful. I mean, we have to figure out how to balance the passion and outrage we feel now over Zhiwen Yan, but not do it in a way that promotes further injustice. That's a hard balancing act, but it's something that we need to figure out.
Well, Yang, I agree to a certain extent. Obviously, we have to. I'm all for advocating for the community and expressing outrage. That is an important function of these venues. I don't think we should muzzle ourselves, but I also think, as you stated, Yang, we need to temper what we express it should be, like, an op-ed piece versus, just obnoxious tweets or rants, like, along the lines of the Proud Boys, or the Oath Keepers, whatever. I mean, and I will say this: change of venue, which is what that motion was in the Vincent King case. They are not so rare, but they are rarely granted. I have a funny feeling that in the Vincent Chin case, you're right, the level of outrage and protest was very great. And I don't know if there's a right or wrong answer, because it was important to the community to express that and have those concerns acknowledged and seen, and for us, the invisible minority, to finally be seen and heard. Most recently, I can only think of one case here in New York. Recently, I forget which, it was a police-involved shooting, which indeed was ultimately moved to Albany from New York City because of the claims made by defense counsels that the officers involved could not get a fair trial in New York City. But again, these are very, very rarely granted. They're not that rarely, the motion is not rarely made, but I don't believe, from what I have seen and heard, let's say take this case, Mr. Hirsch's case, we're not even close. That case is not even close to the threshold that would, I could see, even making a question of whether or not a court would grant a change of venue.
So Jim, I think that, we know that political pressure and community engagement is going to get the attention and the focus on the things that we care about and we think deserve attention. So I think perhaps to go to Edwin's question, which was, if you're not a witness, and I don't believe anyone here is a witness in this case, right? And we want to advocate, what do we need to be careful about as we speak so as to not negatively affect it? One answer I heard you say was, do so in a reasoned manner, in a way that presents well, right? What else do community members need to keep in mind as they advocate?
Well, again, it's just, I guess, pure expressions of emotion or rage, in terms of, something akin to, Jim Lynn posted, we should just storm Rikers, pull Hirsch out and hang him up now. That's you're calling for a lynching, and you want to avoid anything even close to that. I mean, also, just general tirades against Mr. Hirsch's race, culture, his background, his upbringing, whatever. It's try to keep it, fact specific, and not go off the deep end, and almost be accused yourself of being a regular tweet person who just like rages on every day. And I'll know when I see it, but you just have to. I don't think anyone on this call, in fact, would be from the chats I've seen and the questions are about to go off the deep end or go off. So, but I hope I've made myself clear.
So Jim, let me pose a hypothetical to you. If while Glenn Hirsch is sitting in Rikers, there are all these tweets and social media comments about how this guy is guilty and he's a killer. Would defense counsel then be able to make a case that he's already been sort of tried in the press, tried in public, and therefore he's kind of lost his presumption of innocence?
Not in this case. It would have to be, I believe, an extraordinary one, because that happens. The Post and the Daily News, they write that about every homicide suspect who's been arrested and charged, right? And this is the news cycle, the Post and the news cycle. And what's really, and although it's never been enough to overturn a conviction, maybe enough to maybe overturn later identifications in a courtroom, but just what we refer to as the perp walk. The Post and the Daily News will never miss an opportunity to print a photograph of a suspect being led out of the precinct in handcuffs. I can think of nothing more prejudicial that says this man is guilty. And yet, that man or woman is innocent until proven guilty. They've only been arrested and charged with the crime. So, and that is not the basis for a change of venue. You see what I'm saying? So I wouldn't worry about, this murder, calling it, you can call him, he murdered this poor man in cold blood. I don't think that's going to get it. But if you start harping on, if you start making things up or exaggerating or whatever, it's just, don't stoop to that level. The stark facts of this case are cold and hard enough.
Right. Okay, well, let's move on to the next speaker that I have. Thank you, Edwin. So Jess Zhao, I'm going to have you speak. Okay, Jess.
Jess,
Hi,
please.
Hi, everyone. I can't turn my video on, but can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. So thank you for your time. Thank you for the report. I read it. I actually read it for homework prior to my meeting with Grace Meng on Monday. And I just kept referencing your report. So it is so useful. And I know that I can't even imagine how much time you guys spent on it. And I just really appreciate it's like such specific like case study details that you guys went into. So I really appreciate it. I just want to introduce myself. So I'm the vice president of the Forest Hills Asian Association. I've met Chris before a few times, and I actually work at White and Case with Sylvia, but I think we've also just only met virtually before. So Stella referenced this meeting that took place, the community precinct meeting that took place on May 18th. And during that meeting, we did not expect DA Cass to show up. It was supposed to be just a precinct meeting with the community. It was in person. She did show up. She should have expected that there were going to be people having questions about Yan Zhiwen's murderer, because Glenn Hirsch had not been arrested yet at that point. However, she came completely unprepared. She did not even know his name. The entire time, she kept referencing him as, quote, that young man. She never said his name once during the meeting.
45-year-old father of 3.
What's that? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. In my head, I'm like, first of all, say his name. Second of all, I'm like, she has no idea about this. And yes, also, it bears repeating, she lives in Forest Hills. This was one of her neighbors. This happened in her backyard. And still, like, no attention was paid to this, barely any attention. And she initially, the room was split into like sort of two sides, and all the Asians were sort of sitting on one side. And she just went down the side with no Asians and just calling on their questions. And then she was about to just leave. She didn't pick on a single Asian person raising their hand. And then so finally I called out and said, is there a reason why you haven't answered any of our questions? And then, she started getting defensive, and she refused to answer any questions, saying, it's an active investigation. They never share information during active investigations. I had to pull up their own NYPD Crime Stoppers Instagram account and show them, this is your official social media. You share information during active investigations all the time. You seek information from the public during active investigations. Why is this case different? So then that was an easy fact check. And then I got, this is also with multiple meetings with the precinct. They give the same spiel, like, oh, well, we can't control what Crime Stoppers post. We can send them information, but we can't control what they share. I'm like, okay, so you do share information during active investigations then. All right. But you can't control that. But I'm like, but then you have your own, the 112th precinct, Melinda Katz, you all have your own social media accounts. Why aren't you posting information on your own social media accounts then, right? And then I get an excuse of, oh, well, this case is different. I'm like, well, then why is this case different? And then they said, we can't tell you, we can't share with you. All right. And then she really wanted to just like run out of that meeting, but I held her in long enough to then ask about Guiying Ma. And I said at that point, so Guiying Ma's murderer, Elisol Perez, had still only been charged with assault. So Guiying Ma, she was attacked on November 26th. She succumbed to her injuries on February 22nd. The meeting took place on May 18th, and she still had only charged him with assault. Guiying Ma had been deceased for 3 months already, and she still left the charges at assault. So I asked her why, and she said, well, we can't just charge anyone for murder. We need to have a murder weapon. I said, you have the murder weapon. Her head was bashed in. It's a concrete block. You have the weapon. And then she said, okay, well, we need a suspect. And I'm like, you have the suspect. You already charged him with assault. And I said, your own NYPD called it a homicide case. If it's a homicide case, how did you not upgrade the charge to murder? So, and then she just completely tried to dodge. And then a few of us, like Asian people at the meeting afterwards, we like congregated after, and they were just like appalled. They were just like, I have never seen someone politicking so hard before. They were like, we'll never vote for her again. But so then on so the meeting was on May 18th. On May 23rd, she announced that she upgraded the charges to murder and manslaughter in addition to assault. But why did it have to take my confronting her in person with the facts in a room full of people for that to happen? She had since November to investigate. She had since February to investigate Guiying Ma. And so this is clearly, as you guys can tell from your report, this is clearly a pattern, the same pattern behavior from her.
And this is completely unacceptable from someone who's the DA in Queens. For this community in this era, and we need to be politically active and turn this rage into political action so that whatever she runs for, re-election, we show her that if you ignore a community, you will pay that political price, that you will, you ignore your job at your peril,
Yes.
And she seems to have a cold spot for Zhiwen Yan, right? Like, you know what? We put his name in our flyer for a really specific purpose because we needed to say his name because he is not the duck sauce like murder. And that's the last time I'll say it. And the last time maybe we all ever say it because the tabloids have taken it and have way too much fun with it, right? It's just like, you trivialize it. He was riding a scooter like he was a kid. He died because of duck sauce because, Chinese life is cheap. Like duck sauce, right? So it's like Zhiwen Yang, let's say his name. Let's give him his name. They're not comfortable with saying pinyin names. That's the first thing. A Chinese name like that is not a name to them. They don't associate humanity with this person, right? And so we have to say the name. We have to repeat it. We have to normalize it. We have to say this person was the father of 3, working 3 jobs to try to make it. And now he's taken off this earth because in November and December, when you had threats of violence against this restaurant, what did you guys exactly do? We would like to know, right?
Can I just say something really quick? The other murder victim, her name was Orshoya Gall. Okay, it's not like that was particularly easy to say. And I have a screenshot of the tweet that the deputy inspector posted where he didn't even spell Yang Zhiwen's name correctly. It's an outrage.
And just a quick a flashback to Patrick Mateo. When the community was protesting the fact that his assault charge was not getting upgraded to hate crime, the community came out and had posters that said "Cats don't care," and actually I think that had an effect. I think like she saw that and she didn't like it, and about a month later we saw the press release saying they upgraded the charge for hate crime. So
To join Young's point, I wanted to also thank you so much for sharing the details of that meeting. That was infuriating, but so important for more people to know. I wanted to just emphasize this. I think presence at meetings and in certain physical spaces at certain physical times is a tactic and strategy that we should probably be using more. So Edwin, I understand recently you went to court in Queens earlier this week, I think it was on Tuesday, to be present in the room when there was an application for bail to be set in the case. Edwin, I don't know if others were in the room with you, but I do think that those are things that are much harder for DA Katz, much harder for Judge Holder to ignore, that, as opposed to, for instance, posts on Twitter. I mean, I'm not a giant social media person, but I would imagine it's pretty easy to scroll through things or, silence things that you don't want to see. And to Young's point, like posters at a protest that call her out by name is something very hard to ignore. And I think we should think about having even what might be a silent presence, but whatever, a presence at court proceedings.
Thank you. All right, so I'm going to get back to Amy Shin. Amy, are you here?
Oh yeah, hi. Yes, I am.
Okay, good.
Thank you. I thank you for this opportunity to come together, with people with law backgrounds and expertise in this, to meet with us in the community, because I do think we need help thinking about what are the set of actions for us to do, where are the pressure points that should be applied, and what are our goals, just what do we hope to achieve. And I think that I think coming up with a list of things and thinking about that, and a few of us met yesterday, and I think broadly speaking, we have two goals, right? So one is accountability from the police department, and not just, one thing is to kind of list all the things that they did wrong and that should be highlighted and discussed, but if the police are not critically thinking about all the steps and missteps that they took along the way, and not thinking about that, then they can't come up with a plan to how to avoid something like this in the future. They won't have a plan to protect the community in the future from events like this, right? So that's why this matters. It's not just to kind of criticize the police for no purpose, but we want a plan. We want to know what steps the police are doing to prevent something like this from happening in the future. And so accountability is something broadly that we need to do. And the other thing, justice for the Yan family, and thinking about what that might look like, right? So, I think we, is pushing on hate crime, is that the way to go? Or are there other things that we can do, right? And also just, and I think part of it is like the frustration that I think we all feel in reading the media reporting on this, that no one is talking about this as a failure of the institution, the failure of authorities to protect the community, rather than, again, the demeaning way in which the narrative is towards this Asian immigrant that's nameless, and not calling it as it is. Because as I was reading, first reading about this in the newspaper, it didn't occur to me that I did not know that this was part of this ongoing month-long targeted harassment of all workers, and it only unfolded much later on, and that's poor reporting. It's reporters not seeing the bigger picture, right? And so how do we, as a community, get in touch with the right reporters to reframe this as an institutional failure, and call it what it is, which is systemic racism. It's so I think those are the things that we talked about, and we thought these are things that we want. These are our goals, and I guess opening that up to the community and talking about that. I mean, coming up with this, we need an action plan. Like I want to know what I should be doing next.
Yeah, no, I mean, Amy, I think those are two wonderful goals, and those are the goals that we're thinking. My gut feeling is that I totally agree with everything you said. My gut feeling is that immigrant business owners who don't speak English well get the short end of the stick when it comes to the NYPD. They get the short end of the stick when it comes to enforcement by New York City. Everything is enforced on them. They've got to pay all these fines. They've got to pay this. They got to pay that. And then when they need something from the PD don't give them the time of day. They don't speak their language. They don't respect them. They don't give them anything. That's my gut feeling. That's the failure of the PD to serve, in this case, the Chinese immigrant community, and to respond to reports of a person threatening them with a gun more than once, right? I mean, and I think that's the failure. And you're absolutely right. We need to be able to press the police with objective facts and sort of looking at the investigation or lack thereof, particularly in November and December, when he was threatening them with a gun, slashing their tires, engaging in a reign of terror at them. We need to know more about that. That's almost separate from justice, which is right now where the Queen's DA has had their focus sort of refocused, right, because of community concerns. And so I think AABANY's here with you to think this over once we're done with this meeting, further flesh out the plan to do that, engage reporters that we know. And I just also want to note that our task force has people that are representing the widow, the Pro Bono Council for Widows. So we are, can't get into too much detail, but we do have many members here who are engaged in this in a deep way. And we want to come back to you with a plan, after this meeting, after everyone has said, what are the goals? And I think those are two great goals to achieve, and to be able to press them collectively as much as we can on this in an engaged way, but really, we don't need to yell and scream until we have to, but we're going to keep pressing them for answers about these issues that we've identified.
Yes, can I give you guys some facts too? So in relation to potential hate crime charges, the staff said that. So when he didn't get enough sauce, I'm sorry to mention it, and he wanted to return the food, they said due to COVID, they cannot accept his returned food. And then he started, hurling racial epithets at them, using racist language toward them, probably in relation to, coronavirus. So you have multiple witnesses who can corroborate this. And this has been reported in the press. So why is this not even being investigated as a possible hate crime? Like, why not even get a warrant to search its social media, with Patrick Mateo? Why has that not initial step? Why is that initial step missing?
Answer that?
Okay, yeah, Jim, go. Yes, go.
So, first off, anything the NYPD or anyone reads in the newspaper or hears on the news, whether TV, radio, podcast, whatever, that can't be the basis of a search warrant. It has to be basically a first person witness who can actually swear to the facts of what was alleged. Unfortunately, it's not as easy as, I guess, what I would refer to as that TV portrays it is to get a search warrant. So we're often, take for instance the reports that he made these racist comments at the time of the threatening or whatever. Then that would require, I gather, one of the responding officers to interview the person who heard the racial epithets or insults, and then we could perhaps, then if that's brought to DA's office, they can then see, well, maybe we have enough here for a search warrant. But also it depends on what type of crime is being investigated at the time those racial epithets are being hurled. If it's a robbery, a violent felony, maybe we can then get a search warrant for that. But if it's, and I hate to say it, but in the very beginning, this was harassment, and it became criminal mischief because he slashed the tires. And once they mentioned a gun, and I have to say, once a gun was mentioned, I'm surprised that the 112th precinct didn't kick it into somewhat higher gear or high gear, because many people, many citizens in this city know that if you really want to raise the antenna and get the NYPD salivating, you mention a gun. You mention a gun in your 911 call, and all of a sudden, there are PD units responding almost immediately. But again, just get back to the original point. It's got to be more of a, speaking to the people on the scene who were present when it happened, to be able to get enough for a search warrant. And unfortunately, the earlier offenses would probably not have merited a search warrant if it was only a violation or a misdemeanor to a certain extent. So
let me take a stab at answering Jess's question, which I heard as, why aren't the police treating this case even as a potential hate crime? And it goes back to, even our first report, our first anti-Asian violence report, A Rising Tide. When we published it, I was surprised at the number of people who I assumed understood and knew the history of anti-Asian racism and discrimination, and they didn't. A lot of people came to me and they were just, and these are people who are not Asian, and they were just like, I can't believe that there was this history. I just didn't know, and that just boggled my mind. And in part, maybe it's because I've been doing this job as executive director of Asian American Bar Association for so long, and I'm sort of steeped in this knowledge and this history of Asian discrimination and xenophobia and racism. So I just took it for granted. But getting this reaction from a lot of people from our first report was just a wake-up call to me. So when we started the task force, one of the first things we wanted to do was to educate and communicate, because we realized that a lot of people who aren't from our background and experience don't think we suffer discrimination. They don't think that we are subject to discrimination, and they just see us as a minor minority, that we're all doing well, and so we need to educate not just the general public, but frankly law enforcement, DA's offices, really make them understand that when in a case involving Asian Americans, just because you don't see a noose or a swastika, that there is harm being done to us. And
the point that I made earlier, Young, was
Chris, I actually typed it up for you so I can share the screen, and just because I think you're making a very strong point here, like this equivalence of if someone throws a rock through a synagogue window, believe me, the Jewish community is going to rise up and say that's a hate crime. You got the guy on video throwing the rock, go arrest him, and they'll do it. And there is no statement of anti-Jewish epithets in there, but because the rock was thrown at a synagogue and a broke window, that person will get arrested, right? So Black churches equals Jewish synagogues equals Islamic mosques, and we need to get law enforcement to understand that if an attack is on a Chinese small business, a restaurant, a spa, a laundromat, there's a hate crime to be investigated there, even if you didn't get that racial epithet. You have to understand that these attacks on our community in places where they're doing business,
That's where the hate crime's happening, and that's why you need to treat it as a potential hate crime. So part of what we're doing as a task force is to get that education at all levels. And we don't take for granted that law enforcement has to learn this lesson. And that's going to take some time, but that's part of, why we have a task force, and that's part of our mission.
And I have to say that we've thought of that as I was preparing for tonight. And we will be bringing that message to federal, state, and city prosecutors. We will be sort of terraforming their minds to say that, the Chinese business is where many people who don't know Chinese people, that's their interaction with the Chinese family, the Chinese laundromat, the Chinese restaurant. That represents Chinese people in their minds. Chinese churches don't pop into people's minds. So that's the thing we need to begin forming. But just to go to your specific question, which I myself had as I read the news, I followed up with a source, and I said, can that person make that identification? Like, is that something we can follow up on? And that was not something that could be followed up on. And they said no, that there actually were no statements. That's what I heard from a very good source. So that was not possible to follow up on that. Now, that being said, that doesn't mean that didn't happen. Maybe he actually did. Who knows, right? Because we're going back and forth now. There's a lot of stuff going back and forth. A hate crime charge here on the charges that Glenn Hirsch is facing is not going to make a big deal in terms of how much time he's going to serve, but it would make a big deal for accountability. But I feel the accountability issue is really focused on November, December, January, when Glenn is, the accused is harassing, threatening with a gun. We need to know what the police and how the police responded to that.
I can sort of,
yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, go.
I can sort of give you an idea. So like every time I meet with the DI, I get like, I have to fact check, but I get like, I'm able to procure like tidbits of information. So in January, they did create a wanted poster for him. They just never shared it with the public. And his excuse was, well, we never share blurry photos with the public, which we all know is false.
That's ridiculous.
So that's the blurry photo that the restaurant people took of his face, right?
No,
because they no,
that's a separate one. They had a photo of him like walking down the street, like, and they just never shared that with the public. So we're like, so you're telling us that like for the Forest Hills residents, there's a guy walking around threatening to kill people with a gun, and you didn't think it was worthwhile to notify the public about this. Meanwhile, you see that they've even like the general NYPD, the 112th precinct, they're constantly posting like, have you seen this guy? Beware, this person, is like accused of doing this. Like, I mean,
Can I just add, sorry guys, can I just add one thing to what Jess said, just very quickly? On these flyers that have an unclear picture, you don't need an unclear picture of anybody, because the flyer that they issued for Zhiwen Yan, there was no picture of a person. It was just a description of the crime, when it took place, the date and time. So they could have did the same thing in January, and they could have just said, whatever, perpetrator, whatever, perp has a gun, whoever has information, share information with the precinct. But they didn't do that. So the excuse of having no picture that's clear, that's not acceptable, because they didn't issue they still don't have a picture of Hirsch or a suspect for the Yan case, right? The flyer that was just posted was just a description, unless someone else saw one, but I didn't see one.
No, yeah.
Right?
Was there ever a picture?
No, that's what I'm saying.
No.
Photograph of him?
Well, the restaurant staff took a picture,
Right.
supposedly gave it to the precinct, and I don't know what happened to it.
So these facts we're going to help you gather into a narrative. We need to have a narrative, and then out of that narrative, and this is folded into the goals that Amy had outlined, and perhaps we'll create a community document. Facts, goals, narrative, questions that need to be answered, information that we've gathered, and then we can just with one voice say to the PD, and one of the things coming out of it might be you need to have more Mandarin speaking, Fujianese speaking, Cantonese speaking officers that can respond to immigrant businesses in the Chinese community in a sensitive way and in language right? That's one of the recommendations. Like, how many currently serve? Edwin,
So
do you
Chris,
know?
so Chris, I can ask you. I've asked them to have what they call NCOs, neighborhood coordination officers, just an Asian person, just somebody that could look like, the restaurant workers or the staff. And after the spa shootings, I asked them to go to different Asian-owned businesses to go and kind of visit them. So their in turn reply was, "Oh, we go there, we tell them to do what's called a crime prevention survey, or I forget what it's called, report, and they just say, get an alarm system, get a what is it called, silent alarm button or something like that. But this all costs money. So these are all things that they tell you, which is fine, but the restaurant did everything right. They reported everything they did, but for some reason the stuff wasn't there."
May I make a suggestion? I think it would be helpful in any future discussions with the PD about the investigation or lack thereof to at least get a timeline from, I guess, the restaurant employees of what exactly happened, not in terms of the crime, but all of their initial and hopefully, if there weren't, follow-up interactions with the NYPD. I mean, the worst case scenario I can think of is, on each occasion, the initial threatening behavior, the slashing the tires, the gun, they made a 911 call, some officers showed up, took a report, and that was the end of it.
Right.
That would be the worst case scenario. That would be the worst case scenario because there's no follow-up by a detective later on. Maybe I could start enhancing it. Did on the second occasion, you say one of the employees took a picture of Mr. Hirsch. How was that handed or delivered to the PD? Was it emailed? Was it texted? Do we still have a photograph? Do we still have that photograph in that employee's cell phone? And why did they delete it? Did they post it in their own restaurant? I mean, so that they could know who they were dealing with. We're all
I get it. Yeah, I get it. So,
Yeah, no.
On that, but we need to tell them this is what we know happened. So
Right.
why wasn't there a follow-up call by a detective?
Right.
So,
Right.
so
Can you confirm that a photograph of the suspect was indeed sent to the NYPD?
Right.
yes, they confirmed that at the CB6 meeting, which is also recorded, by the way. It's up on YouTube. I can share the link with you guys.
Okay.
Yeah, and so when we asked to press the DI, when I pressed the DI on it, he said, and other people mentioned this, that they did stay outside his apartment one night. He didn't specify which night, but Hirsch never came home. And so that was it. That was their one and only attempt that they made to arrest him previously. And then he made the excuse that they found 8 other guns that he kept in his wife's home. And so even if they had arrested him the first time, he said most people with gun charges are out on bail. He said he would have been out on bail anyway, and he would have just accessed one of the other 8 guns that he kept at his wife's apartment, his wife's home. So he was making excuses in his head for why, and he said that, you make it seem like we're responsible because we didn't arrest him and that would have changed the outcome. And like, that's besides the point of the fact that like they still have to do their job. It's not up to them to then go from like A to Z to figure out like, well, is this worth it? Is this worth making an arrest? Because maybe he'll be out on bail anyway, and maybe he'll ask for all the other guns. Like he was using that. It's on video. I can send it to you guys. He was making that excuse last night. And meanwhile, I couldn't talk back because I was muted. But how about if they made that arrest, they investigated, they probably would have turned up all the other 8 guns. And that actually probably could have prevented Yan Zhiwen from being murdered. If they had even arrested him and begun an investigation, they could have confiscated the other 8 illegal guns. Like he probably, they gave him a month, and I think he stashed them at his wife's storage. And also, here's another fact: they arrested his wife on June 3rd on illegal possession of firearms, a whole slew of felony charges, but she's out on bail. So he was like using her as look, she's out on bail as well on gun charges. Instead of thinking like if they had arrested him, maybe they could have confiscated all those guns and Yan Zhiwen would be alive today.
I agree with you that the reason or the excuse or the argument that he would just use any of the other guns to commit this horrible crime is ridiculous. It's not logical, and you're right. In terms of law enforcement, you deal with the here and now.
Yeah.
And if you have a gun now. You have witnesses who can say they can put a gun in his hand, and you have enough information to get a search warrant and go grab a gun. Go grab it.
Yeah.
They're sitting there like, well, he might have had another gun stashed somewhere else. You're right. He might have. He might have already stashed his other 8 guns in a farmhouse somewhere. I don't know. Now, as for the female, the wife, she was. It was probably a foregone conclusion that no judge was probably going to set bail on her, but because those weren't her guns, that was her husband's guns. She was I guess she was aiding and abetting in the hiding of evidence. But in this present day situation, it was highly unlikely that they were going to set bail on her. But I haven't even addressed why there's bail set on this guy. I don't understand what happened.
One of my questions too.
I don't understand. I've been trying to figure out what happened here. Unfortunately, I'm not on screen right now. I'm recovering from COVID. I apologize. I don't think you guys want to see what I look like right now. But I have not been able to quite follow what's been going on this past 5-6 days. But
Edwin, could you share with us what happened in court from what you could hear?
I actually, they postponed it, so I couldn't stay for the actual the hearing, but I was actually there for an earlier case, and we were told to get there like 10 or 11. It got postponed to like 2 in the afternoon. I couldn't stay that long. But the one thing that was very noticeable was that it was just Chinese press there. I thought there would be more folks in the community there. I guess that's why I wasn't sure if it was public information, if I was even allowed to share it. But so that's why I didn't really share it, because I wasn't sure. But it just seemed that there was really nobody was aware of it, and the press was aware of it, and so that was all I saw there. There was like 4 people from press there. That's it. And there were a couple of people there. I didn't know who they were. So
here's what's I find interesting is that in this matter, and Elaine, I think you know what I'm talking about. What the district attorney's office did was, before they arrested Mr. Hirsch, they presented this case to the grand jury. So even before he was arrested, the grand jury heard evidence and voted an indictment. And I gather the top count was murder in the 2nd degree, which is the top charge. So when Mr. Hirsch was finally arrested and brought to court, he wasn't brought to criminal court. He was brought directly to Supreme Court,
right?
And initially he was remanded. I think he was remanded. I don't understand. Initially. Yeah, I don't understand why it was put over for such a short date, for June 7th or 8th or 9th, whatever, unless it was because they wanted to do a bail application. And I'm kind of curious. We don't know yet what a judge can change bail at their discretion, but usually it's based on a change. This is open quotation. Change in circumstances, close quotation. So I don't know what the change in circumstances was that caused a judge to actually set bail, because originally it was remand. Remand means there's no amount of money that can be posted by a defendant which is going to release him from jail. That is basically saying you're not getting out. But something happened on either last Thursday or Wednesday, where the judge or the court ended up setting some type of bail. It's still very, very high. very, very high. Very, very doubtful. From what I saw, he's going to be able to make it without someone selling, a couple of homes. But I don't know what happened there. And
Right.
And
Can we find out? Like, is that public information? And how do we find that out?
yeah, it should be. It should be a public record. But I'm also wondering if, and this is speculation, but from my experience, if some record was made on the first day he was brought to court, that the defendant was going to be remanded for murder, but then the defense counsel said, I'm going to be filing a writ, and that's a writ of habeas corpus, then perhaps it was not the trial level court which set bail, but it may have been an appellate division court. An appellate judge may have decided to set bail. And then we get it gets a little more iffy because many appellate judges have no background whatsoever in criminal law. So,
Well, I think the justice holder is the one that set the bail. I don't know if someone else can someone else advise him to set bail, or does he? I thought he set his own bail.
I think Justice Holder probably set the original bail at remand, but for whatever reason, he then adjourned it for a relatively short date, because there was no further grand jury action coming. The man's already been indicted. So I'm only again speculating educationally, perhaps, but that he set it over for a bail app, or because the defense attorney made some indication that he was going to file for a writ with the appellate division. I understand that we have a pro bono attorney working with the victim's widow, and maybe they kept her informed, or kept the attorney informed about why bail was ultimately set, as opposed to him remaining in remand. I don't know why. So
they are keeping the widow abreast of what's happening. A lot of what the court has been doing with regards to the bail has been in chambers, out of public view, in part because there's a lot of things that are sealed in his records, as I understand. Yeah, everyone's talked about the sealed records. When you have an arrest and charge, but no conclusion, and it's dismissed or whatever, that's when they're sealed. So these are charges that are never proved. So he's not guilty of them, right? And so for whatever reason, those things cannot be happening in public, and could explain some of our wondering about what happened or what didn't happen. I mean, one of the things,
Chris, I'd be very, very skeptical if that's one of the reasons they trot out there that bail was set, because his sealed matters, his dismissed matters could not be used at a future date or something. Because even if Mr. Hirsch had no criminal record whatsoever, this guy has been charged and indicted for murder too, and I see no reason that's appropriate why he should not be remanded at this juncture. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's great to hear a former prosecutor of many years sort of say that. And, that's another question we need to answer. But I don't want to get stuck in that, because we won't.
I knew that, and I just wanted to address it, because I knew that there were some people in the audience who were wondering what would happen. And quite honestly, we need to find out what happened. And I have to say, I can't believe that the DA's office consented to this. I think this was definitely done over the DA's objection.
Yeah, no, they did not consent to it. From, I think, even what the press is reporting, the prosecutors wanted remand the whole time.
Right, exactly. And that would be standard for a murder to defendant.
And thank you for addressing that. And by the way, Jim, thank you for coming to us from your sick bed.
Well, you saw me, you'd probably cringe, but it's okay.
Feel better. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. I hope you feel better.
Okay.
Last question. Can I just ask one last question? So how can we get the family in order of protection? Can we get the staff, the Great Wall staff, in order of protection, because the wife is out on bail and unfortunately bail was set for him? Like, is that a possibility?
I mean, that we can explore that, but there doesn't seem to be a threat from either his wife or from other family members. So there doesn't seem to be any evidence that they are a danger to them. At least that's what I'm seeing. That's what I'm hearing. But I think we should explore that. Nothing should be off
Was
the
it,
table.
do you know, Chris, was it ever even requested?
I'm not aware that it was requested.
Okay.
Do they know that?
Um,
Yeah, I don't know, because I know the Great Wall staff, I think they wanted one, but right now they're trying to like install bulletproof partitions. But yeah, I don't know if they have, what's that?
Who are they afraid of?
It's
Uh,
any future incidents. Well, before the arrest, it was the perpetrator. But now after the arrest, it can be any other person that, could come back to threaten them.
Right. Well, for an order of protection, you're going to need specific individuals and a reason. But they're not going to do an order of protection for because they fear. Because right now, there's a lot of fear going on, and they're rightfully fearful because they've gone through trauma. But let's table that. Let's table that as something we can explore.
So not
Sorry,
even
Chris.
against Hirsch, they can't get one against Hirsch,
Well, he's right now still in prison.
but we can't control that. But
Chris, I think that it's actually, from what I noticed in some of the other cases that we were looking at from the 2021, from the report in 2021, I'm pretty certain it seemed like victims, complainants in some of these cases did request orders of protection. And so I did notice that there seemed to be, judges granting them even. And so I wonder whether or not the employees, the owner, the widow herself have actually asked the assigned ADA, said to them that they would like to have some in place, because I could see a judge granting it. I don't know if Jim feels differently, but
No, I here it is. It's almost like an inverse proportion. Like if the DA's office had requested an order of protection from the get-go, I agree with Elaine. There's a good chance that order would have been granted. But now we're talking, it's now June 10th. It's the time is going, and the longer time goes on and there are no overt threats that present themselves, or has presented themselves, the less likely such an order will be granted, because the judge or the defense counsel is just going to say, Your Honor, there have been no threats made to the Great Wall staff or the widow since my client's arrest. And I see no reason for an order of protection. There's been no attempt made to communicate with them, no attempt made to intimidate or coerce them. And,
well, maybe Jim, one could be, I don't know if one was asked for when they granted bail, when they set bail. That would have been a likely moment, because, prior to that, it had been a remand situation. But I wonder if it makes sense now, even if it's a couple of days past Tuesday, to say, wait, now there's this possibility he could post bail.
No, you should definitely seek it. But also, just because someone's in jail doesn't mean they're not
dangerous.
They're not able to actually call or get other people to try to coerce or intimidate a witness, a victim, what have you. No, I think it's definitely it's a worthwhile endeavor to see what's worse. The worst comes to worst. The prosecutor will ask at the next court date, can we get an order of protection, or get the case advanced to request an order of protection, and the court will say no. But at least the request will be out there.
So we'll put that as part of our work plan and potential suggestions.
Thank you guys so much.
So one of the things that we had a question in the chat was, how can private sector businesses do? I mean, you can donate to this program is not about donating, but you can donate to the efforts that we're doing, so they can fund the efforts that we're doing, or get companies to donate to the T3 fund, which is the nonprofit arm, the part of what we're doing. And so that's one way. But I mean, what can you do from where you are? I mean, you're doing it. You guys are doing it. You're involved. And the thing is, you'll find out what you can do as you go along, because you just have to show up. And then, when you show up, you find out what the next step is. And in many ways, this is what we're doing. I mean, I don't know if that answer, I don't know if anyone else, in the panel wants to speak to that. Kevin, you've had your hand up, so if you want to talk.
Thank you, Chris. So my name is Kevin Lee. I live in Forest Hills. I'm not a witness. I'm not related. I'm not a lawyer. But I am on the community board, and I joined at the beginning of 2020 before the pandemic, appointed by interim borough president Sharon Lee. While that was a time when Melinda Katz was moving on to her district attorney role. I think everyone on this call knows as well as I do, just, whether you're a lawyer or you're an advocate, activist, everyone who has been doing this work the last few years, it's been incredibly just challenging and frustrating. I think I'll focus on just the issue of harassment versus what's a harassment, what's a bias, what's a crime. I've hosted, co-hosted, participated in multiple workshops with the Office for the Prevention of Hate Crimes, with the New York City Commission on Human Rights. And they tend to focus on, okay, this is a harassment, this is a bias, the crime is dealt with. Crime falls under NYPD, and then I'll work with the 112th precinct here, and then they draw that line too. But with the case of Zhiwen, I'm just like, well, this is a case where you can look at how it's an Asian hate crime, like textbook. And I know, for the lawyers on the call, you're like, well, it's very hard to prove, but you know what, from the bias and the harassment that from the timeline that we need from the restaurant employees, if this started happening, to Jess's point, like back in November and December and January, and nobody in the public knew. And meanwhile, the politicians and the elected officials are all about we have to stop gun violence. We have to do this or do that. But here you have a very specific case in Forest Hills, and so it's been incredibly frustrating. And to Jim's point of how dealing with law enforcement for them, it is the here and now, because I've pressed the DI on the last 2 years, just before all of these things started happening, when it was citywide. I was like, hey, I'm concerned about anti-Asian hate, and they would try to quasi reassure the community, but it's just not translating, and we cannot take their word at face value at all. There's a lot of evasion from the 112, a lot of non-responses, a lot of we cannot answer you, we can't tell you, we can't be transparent with the community, because of X, Y, and Z reason. Okay, fine. What I wanted to talk about was, to Chris's point of just, I think when I first started making space on the community board and in the community to talk about these issues, when I first heard about this murder tragedy, my first response was just to center it around Chinese restaurants and the immigrant experience. I come from a Chinese ethnic Vietnamese refugees background. My mom came over here with her 3 brothers, and they started in the restaurant business, the Chinese fast food restaurant business, and they've had different iterations of it, over the last 40, 50 years. It's what gives it's what gave our family the livelihood that we needed. Everyone on this call, we are, white collar professionals talking with each other on Zoom, but you know what, we can all relate to that experience of having parents or grandparents who worked for fast food restaurants or laundromats. It's all of these different small businesses, immigrant owned businesses that that make it even possible. And to Jim's point and Chris's point, like that long, and to Yang's point, like that long history of anti-Asian hate and discrimination, like we know it. And I like, if there is any way to just to go back to centering that the magic words, if you will, from like Stella was using that term, like the magic words of, yes, Chinese restaurant equals a Jewish temple equals Islamic mosque. I don't think it's a leap. It shouldn't be a leap, and I think that we have to just focus on that experience. I really hate that we always have to prove our humanity. Even just thinking through like how we go through this exercise, like in the American mainstream, like everyone will easily accept a Jewish temple or Islamic mosque or Black church, but making this case of the Chinese restaurant, I guess we'll put the work in. We have to put the work in. So that's my comment.
Yeah. And I think that, part of our understanding is by talking to you to say, this is what we're thinking. Doesn't that make sense? Because that's the thing missing within the communities, the larger America's conception of understanding. When they look at a Chinese restaurant, they think, oh, that's an attack on a restaurant. That's not an attack on Chinese people. For most of us, we understand very pointedly, no, that's an attack on Chinese people, because Chinese people are represented by their food and their restaurants. And so I think the more we talk about, we spread it out, we help people. We saw our work the last 2 years as helping the DAs understand it. Like, we weren't like, you're stupid, you just don't get it. The Jews have been good about like, this is the problem. This is what people need to understand. Now let's just get it out there. And we need to learn from that example of understanding our community, because we haven't focused on it, and then telling everyone else, and then sort of repeat it 1,000 times until it becomes part of the culture. It becomes reflexive. Oh, a stone thrown at a synagogue? My God, right? That's the reaction we need for an attack on an Asian business. Yeah.
May I add something?
Yes.
So in terms of what Chris literally just said about the Jewish community, for the last almost 3-4 years, I dealt with Crown Heights, some areas of Sheepshead Bay, Coney Island, and I dealt with some very large Jewish communities. And you're absolutely correct that if a synagogue or temple is vandalized or desecrated, or an Orthodox Hasidic man is walking along the street and he gets just pushed down for no obvious reason, it's going to be investigated as an anti-Semitic incident. However, don't for one instance believe that the NYPD does that automatically. The Jewish community does not take anything for granted, that those incidents will be investigated as hate crimes. The Jewish community is on the phone immediately with anybody who they know in the precinct or in the DA's office or their local, councilman or whatever. They're not just sitting back and saying, oh, we don't have to worry about that. The Jewish community has, I guess, unfortunately, years of being able to put this into effect, but they are galvanized into reaching out to elected officials, NYPD, and the press about anything that is that they perceive as an anti-Semitic hate crime. And that's maybe a lesson. Not only do I think that this is a great idea, trying to equate these houses of worship to, I guess, businesses. It might be a tough sell, but I think it's, but it happened with the Sheepshead Bay hammer attack. That was done. That was seen as a hate crime. Unfortunately, the individual there was also apparently the experts, the mental hygiene experts hired by both the district attorney's office and the defense counsels agreed that he was mentally insane, criminally insane, whatever. But in any case, I think it's worth trying to get that done. We have, unfortunately, we had history even here in Brooklyn, where Korean delis, bodegas were targeted a few years ago, right? And we have that going on too, right? So it's not that far of a stretch to, I think, try to equate establishments that are owned and run by AAPI people as an attack on their culture. Okay, so I applaud that.
Thank you, Jim. And right now the focus is on the PD, particularly the precinct 112 and CATS. The mayor can do something, but they're not going to directly, and coup is in the mayor's office. And we can bring all buttons to bear, or all the things that we can bear. But right now it seems like, the 112 has questions they need to answer, and then I think, we want to help the DA, get justice here. And we're going to put, I think, a work plan. We'll huddle up and talk about how we do a work plan and things that we want to suggest and approach. And then Vivian, why don't you speak?
Hi there. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Oh, great. Oh, my name is, sorry, I met in my family's place. So it's good that it's showing up as my name. Yeah, thank you so much for AABANY for having this. Thank you, Chris, for inviting me, to letting me know about it. And thank you for the Forest Hills Asian Association, to everyone who spoke, and for folks who haven't yet had the chance to speak. But I think that what I just wanted to share is it's so important. I am actually familiar with Forest Hills because anyway, I grew up around there, or beyond, further north. But I think it's important that this whole idea of the efforts of the restaurant owners or workers to actually, that they made those attempts, that outreach to the precinct, right? Because that counters the narrative that, Asian Americans, but particularly working class immigrant Asian Americans who run and manage these businesses and work in these small businesses, are passive and just don't care. Because obviously these folks did care and made their efforts. So I think that that's an important narrative to counter as well. And that, sorry, there's something in the background here, but we should, that work should be, and that the work should be collaborative. Definitely.
No, I think that's really important to highlight. I mean, as we're talking about them, I'm thinking of, I think I've talked to some of you about People versus Hall, important case from the 1850s in California. White robbers attacked a Chinese mining camp, and they killed them in the course of the robbery to steal the gold from the Chinese miners. And they were convicted. George Hall was convicted and sentenced to hang. But eventually, he killed a person that came out to stop him, to stop that robbery. But he appealed it, and the court let him go on that murder because non-white people were not allowed to testify against white people in court in California under statute at that time. That's what happened. And in many ways, I kind of see what happened, particularly with that, sort of like trying to get the protection of the police, trying to get the protection of the law to say our businesses, our lives are under threat. And then I think quite clearly, at this point, from what we know, they were not taken seriously. They were ignored, and it led to terrible circumstances. One more point is that I know of another case in Queens where a Chinese American or Taiwanese American dentist, a pharmacist, he ordered gun parts, in part because he wanted to collect guns, but in part because of anti-Asian violence. And he was recently charged with a whole host of serious crimes because of all the guns he had in his possession, which he had in part possessed because of his fear of anti-Asian violence. And that is part of what the Queen's DA is doing. They trumpeted that. That wasn't a press release. But I just want to sort of lay that alongside of everything else we've been talking about tonight. So I think, any last thoughts? Kathleen, did you want to say anything?
I just wanted to mention that I've been involved with OCA, Asian Pacific Advocates, for several decades. And I wondered if it would be useful to engage them. I'm not on the board right now, but I'm still a member. I kind of want to be sensitive to what was said earlier in terms of being engaged in the right way and not negatively impacting the case. But I kind of see maybe there are different committees or subcommittees that we can set up, and maybe some can be more on the public pressure side, and while others are focusing on, getting the timeline from the restaurant people and really getting at the facts of the case, what actually happened and what went wrong.
Is Liz Yang still there?
She actually is no longer president, but she's doing more
still
voting
around.
rights work, actually.
She's still around, and OCA is still around. And
No, Liz is still
Well,
around.
if
but she's
anyone
not
knows how to
as
get her
active.
foot in the door, if anyone knows how to get her foot in the door, it'll be Liz. So
Yeah, she's very persistent.
we'll take that into advisement, Kathleen. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay.
So if there's no other comments, anyone else want to put up a hand? If not, we're going to meet internally with the task force to talk. We're going to come up with this with some proposals as to how we might proceed, and then of course have you as part of that once we've met. And Young, is there anything you want to say before we go for tonight?
Yeah, I just want to thank everybody for coming out. We hear you. You've said a lot of very important and meaningful things. I think we do need to band together. We need to strategize. We need to keep the pressure on. We need to stay vocal. There's that old saying, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. So we have to squeak, I think, extra hard, extra loud. So we look forward to continue to work with you all, collaborate with you all, and let's bring about some justice here.
So Young and Chris, sorry, it's one more question from Edwin. So in regards to trying to set up a meeting with DA Katz, do you want us to hold off, or what do you want us to do? Or just let us know. Let us know. Let us know.
I think we should think about what's coming out of that meeting before we set it up.
Right.
I
Okay.
don't think we should just call her and set something up without having a game plan going in.
Yeah.
Okay. And is it
By
like
the
one
way,
meeting, or
just-
should we have more than one meeting? Like, we'll have one with us, and then bring you guys, and then you guys have another one on your own, or I don't know. I just think that
You guys already have a meeting set up with the DA Katz?
we're trying to set it up, but we don't know if it's ever going to happen. But
I mean, do you guys, FHAA, have a game plan going in as to what you plan to do at that meeting?
We have some things that we wanted to try to address, but that's why we want to dialogue with you guys to figure out what else can we add to it.
All right.
Well, when we met with Grace, one of the ideas was that we could use this as your report actually as an excuse to meet with her and the other DAs. So
I would think that the Queen's DA's office is not very happy with us for what we put in the report.
Oh yeah,
that's okay. That's okay.
She doesn't like us either. So
it's okay. It's okay. They don't have to like us. They need to meet us and listen to us.
Right. No, got it. Right. So again, I would love to sit down with you guys, and if you have like a game plan that you want to sit down and talk to us about, let's talk. But do you actually have a date yet, or you don't have a date yet because we haven't solidified anything?
No, but we haven't pushed it. We can push it. We can call every single day and ask, but we just haven't.
Right. Okay.
Like Jess said, she's in the neighborhood. I see her, and we have staff contacts. So
right.
It's whether or not she wants to set up a meeting with us.
No, and okay. I have several ideas brewing in my head already, but
we want you guys.
Let me bring it internally to the task force, and let's plan on reaching out to you guys next week, and let's plan this out. I do think, I think we do want to have at least one meeting with Queens DA Katz. It may not be with her directly. We actually, in our prior contacts, we dealt with Colleen Babb, who's our executive DA, like her, basically her right hand. And it may be actually easier to get a meet with her, which is not to say that we don't ultimately get a meeting with Queens DA Katz, but my sense is that, we probably can get a meeting with her office through Colleen Babb first.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much. Have a good weekend.
Good night.
Oh.
Thank you, everybody.